And it's time for another episode of Dear Jane, where we are advancing. How about this for a line? We're changing the culture for life one conversation at a time.
Ooh, I like that.
You think?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a work in
Well,
progress.
because a lot of people are changing culture in different ways, but it's good for us to actually talk to people and talk about ideas, talk about new data
Impacting the culture
points.
for life one conversation at a time.
Yeah, I like it.
That's not bad.
That's got a good ring to it.
Yeah, so we're kicking off a new year. Lots of great things planned, lots of great conversations. One of the things we're working on is a new website. And the team, you have a nice, like, professional photographer that's going to come and take all these glamour shots of you and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Not me. They've asked for action photos of me.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we could just, like,
Mike, poking fun at me.
well, and they wanted, like, I mean, they're wanting some, so I'm wondering if we could just do some of those right now, just get them out of the way. So, like,
Yeah.
here's my very interested face.
Oh, that's good.
And then here's my somebody said something funny on the podcast face. And then if somebody says something angry, I'll be,
Really disagree with that.
Yeah.
That's a good face.
what other emotions should we shoot?
What about like that's kind of a crazy idea. I'm intrigued face. That says less intrigued, more.
What are you talking about? Face?
Yeah. I like the hand gestures with that.
There you go. So
That's
hopefully, they should have what they need right there. So
yeah, I think you got them covered. We'll expect to see all of those and more on the new Dear Jane website coming very soon. Keep your eyes peeled for that. For
So
all
you'll
of
have all
Scott's
these-
glamour shots.
yeah, really, really nice professional shots of Marcy, and then you'll have like, it was just kind of like me back in when I was in art class back in the day. People would have these really nice pictures, and then I had turned in my stick figures, and it's like, oh, there's Scott's
Like
stuff.
Photoshop versus Microsoft Paint.
Yes, something
There
like
we
that.
go. Yeah.
Got a great conversation today, don't we?
Speaking of great conversations that are impact culture changing, whatever tagline you said earlier.
Impacting the culture, one conversation at a time.
Yeah. This conversation will definitely do it. I'm very excited about today's guest. It's someone that has influenced my thinking on the issue of life in many different ways over the years. So I'm looking forward to people also getting to listen in. Before we jump to today's conversation, though, need to give a thank you to our sponsors, Cogency Strategic. Tell us more about them.
So Cogency Strategic is about winning campaigns for life. So, we have all these state amendments. Every single state, they're trying to change state constitutions. But I think the big thing that they want people to think about right now, even though we just came off an election and we don't have one for a while, thank God. Now is the time to be establishing your voice and educating and building awareness before it gets noisy, before the other side starts poisoning the well, before all that starts to happen. Now is the time to get out there and help people understand the truth about abortion, the truth about, even more specifically, what's coming up in your state. We just saw here recently, already here in 2025, Virginia, in their legislature, they're starting the process of having a ballot amendment there. That's going to happen. We know Nevada, that's coming up. Multiple other states, it's coming down the tracks. We see it coming down the tracks. Cogency Strategic can help you build the message, help build awareness and education in your state to help fight these. And really, it's not possible to do it too early. So we would encourage you to check out the different ways they can help with your messaging at cogencystrategic.com.
Great. The time to think about changing hearts and minds is now, because that's kind of a long game. And everything you're doing now will lay a great foundation for when these battles come to your state, because they will. If they haven't already, Scott already mentioned a handful of states that we know they're coming, and there are more. But Without further ado, let's introduce our guest for today. So we are joined by Dr. Charlie Camosy. He is a professor of medical humanities at the Creighton University School of Medicine. He's written a book called Beyond the Abortion Wars. That's the one I read several years ago that really helped shape my thinking on this issue of abortion and how do we come together as different groups to work together to attack this issue. You're going to hear some interesting policy ideas, some kind of out of the box thinking that I think you'll find really insightful and helpful as you think about your pro-life efforts wherever you are. So enjoy this conversation that we have with Charlie Camosy.
And this is my excited about our guest face.
Charlie, thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Dear Jane. We're excited to chat with you.
Oh, same here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were in some meetings recently that you were a part of, and you talked about how the pro-life movement kind of has trust issues with the public. Can you speak more to that and how we can fix that?
That's a big question. Well, I think it's maybe helpful just to divide the public into various kinds of publics, to think about that first. So there's the young people sort of public. There's sort of the mothers public. And at the risk of going on too long, I'll add a third public, the media or sort of public discourse public. Mm-hmm. And those are definitely three different sort of approaches and publics to try to build trust with. I think especially with mothers, let's say, we really need to emphasize all that we're already doing, and also what we are trying to do more when it comes to helping women and families. I'm thinking here especially of not only private initiatives like all the great pregnancy help centers and the like, but I'm also thinking of, for instance, there's a lot of pro-life legislators advocating for much larger child tax credits in the upcoming omnibus bill. There's people, at least in my circles, who are thinking hard about intimate partner violence and how that overlaps and correlates with forced abortions, paid family leave, make birth free, on and on. There's so many interesting things happening. Related to that, I think, is the question about the media, though, because it's really difficult to break through and have those stories told. I think we need to really work to build trust with media, develop relationships with media, find ways to get these stories out there in a very particular way. And then finally, with young people, gosh, I think we see some green shoots already. The recent election, I think, gives us a sense that young people are not a monolith when it comes to these sets of issues and are open to hearing things, and relationship building is important there as well.
Some good layers to talk about and to attack there. The media one intrigues me. I used to be in the media, love to watch it and sort of monitor how the media evolves and handles things. So, there's a real big trust issue. I mean, what we're talking about here is them trusting us. Of course, that's a two-way street in many ways. But how do we even begin? Because of that trust issue, and there's so many people in our movement who understandably think they have agendas and everything else. How do we even begin to make inroads with the media?
Well, I think the main way in is not for better and more persuasive arguments about abortion. We already have those, and they're not resonating in ways that are able to build trust. I think that's in part because a lot of people, including many media in elite circles, which media circles have become elite circles in the last couple decades, simply don't have their views on abortion because of arguments or evidence. It's on a far different level. It's on a maybe even more primal and fundamental level. In part because many of them are very close to people that have had abortions. Many of them have had abortions themselves. It's difficult to come to a particular kind of conclusion that you don't have already when it's that close to you. And so what I really think we need is another way in, a kind of non-abortion way in, a kind of human dignity through other means that we then show has particular implications for how we think about abortion. So, for instance, disability rights advocacy, I think, is absolutely essential, in part because abortion is used as a tool of elimination for so many populations, especially Down syndrome, with disabilities. Another way, I think, is through, again, what I was mentioning earlier about social supports for women and families. I mean, obviously, we've all heard the narratives. The pro-life movement is anti-woman. It's kind of misogynistic. Women in the pro-life movement, you probably heard, are somehow self-hating because of this. To the extent that we can, we need to advocate for and then work with media to help promote these other things that we're doing, which are definitely pro-woman and pro-family. And then, I think some of it's just the blocking and tackling of forming relationships and showing up and doing interviews and sending emails and appearing at various events. And, because obviously personal connections is where this is at. And, some of us have personal connections, but we can do definitely a better job of building those trusting personal relationships, I think.
So what I hear you saying is not so much about pro-abortion, media specifically, not so much about pro-abortion as it is our pro-life efforts, and sort of coming at it from that angle.
Well, I mean, I don't want to downplay what you just said. The media is largely pro-choice, and many are pro-abortion. But again, I think they hold those views and the pro-life movement for reasons that have very little to do with the kind of arguments that many, including myself, I'm an academic, I love to make arguments, but I've been humbled in my time in the pro-life movement, I think, by realizing that my skill set is in making arguments is pretty limited in its ability to change hearts and minds. And so relationship building, focusing on other issues that have implications for abortion, I think those are the ways to go, in my humble opinion.
I'm wondering too, because I'm thinking about some of the other movements within politics today to expose kind of the industry behind issues. So there's been a lot of movement in kind of like the health and wellness space to expose all the toxins that the FDA allows in our food and just cancer-causing drugs or ingredients. I'm wondering if there's a way we can shift perception around abortion by exposing the industry that's behind it. So I know you've talked some about coerced abortion, and I don't think people understand how prevalent that is. I wonder if you could speak some to that. And I'm also wondering, do you think that's a way we could even begin to reframe or reshape the issue to bring in people who maybe wouldn't label themselves necessarily as pro-life, but they're against the coercion of women, or they're against some of the industries that are behind these issues?
That's incredibly well said. I couldn't agree with that more. Few people know, and this is again one of the things I think that could come out if we form relationships with media and help them understand what's going on here. And like you said, it's not directly about abortion or making abortion illegal, but it's adjacent to it in a way that would maybe help people understand differently how abortion actually functions in our culture structurally, like you said. So as you may know, I think both you probably do, but very few others know, the leading cause of death for pregnant women is homicide. And intimate partner violence correlates with abortion very, very strongly. And for those of us that have been in the pro-life movement for some time, we're not at all surprised by this. But almost everybody I talk to who's not is shocked, in fact, by these numbers and these statistics and these correlations and facts. So I do think, and then I just saw the other day Callum Miller, a physician, British physician in the UK, tweet out that one reason why this epidemic of sexual violence that they're facing in the UK and other places in Europe goes unchecked is because abortion is used to sort of cover it up, some of the results of it. And they don't have laws that 14, 15-year-old girls there can get abortions without parental permission. So these things get totally covered up for that reason. That's a pretty extreme, though unfortunately fairly common example. But there are intimate partner violence, sexual violence, other kinds of violence. Abortion is violence in itself, but it's also covering up other kinds of structural violence. And so I couldn't be more in agreement about the need to talk about structures and systems. Let me add one more to it. Isn't direct violence, but it's about coercion. So much of our media industry, entertainment industry, corporate culture, the highest levels, people think about abortion as a tool for the poor, and it is fairly prevalent in those communities, but it's very prevalent also in those other communities. It's used as a tool that women are just expected to employ to sort of rise up the ranks and pay their dues. And in those other, entertainment and corporate and other sort of elite circles, political circles as well. And so, to the extent that we can see how abortion actually functions, rather than the sort of ridiculous, overly simplistic, this is sort of empowering for women narrative, that'll be all to the good. So I couldn't agree more.
You're talking about being as an academic, you like to make arguments. One of the things that you argue that I find fascinating that you might have to convince me on a little bit is you said, quote, most people agree on the major issues at stake in abortion law and morality. So most people in America are on the same page. I hope that's true. Boy, I don't know that it is.
Where did you get that quote from?
On your website?
Oh, but what source? I mean, I wrote that. I've been writing about abortion for a very long time. So
Okay.
it could be that I wrote that 10, 20 years ago.
Oh, well, that could be too. You think that was ever the case? Or do you think that's the case now?
I think it certainly was the case. I have maybe a more complex view now. It used to be the case that very few people would, speaking of arguments, would deny that the prenatal child was a human being, right? That these are arguments that academics make, and some make in bioethics circles, and the sort of radical pro-abortion people do. But in almost every other circumstance, common circumstance, we use baby and child language, right? Nobody ever heard of a fetus bump or a fetus shower. No spouse ever turns to their wife turns to their husband and says, honey, come quick, the fetus is kicking. These are babies, these are children. No one is ever with fetus, right? They're with child. So, in almost every circumstance, we sort of know as a culture what this being is. It's a human being just like us. Most of the actual views about abortion, as I mentioned earlier, have very little to do with arguments and evidence. They're more primal, they're more foundational. It's about something that really has nothing to do with arguments and evidence at the end of the day. This is my sort of rude awakening with regard to this. And when you actually get into the nitty-gritty, at least 10 years ago, it seemed pretty clear that about 70% of people after 12 weeks wanted abortion broadly illegal, and before 12 weeks broadly legal. And so I think if that quote is a reference to anything, it's probably those things. But I need to know. I don't remember where that quote is from. I'm sorry.
So that's okay. But so, I mean, I guess we would probably agree on the point that, I mean, how do you think our society views it in general? Do we have any common ground here?
Yeah, I think even if the line isn't 12 weeks anymore, and I'm not sure what it is, I think we're in a very sort of an era of flux and ferment, if you will, when it comes to these things. There's been a sort of shock to the system with Dobbs, and we've kind of rolled around a lot. I don't think we've come to a kind of consensus about these things. But in general, if you just look at the polls now, it might not be 12 weeks, but at some time in the second trimester, most people still think it should be broadly illegal after that time, and most people still think it should be broadly legal before that time. So there is common ground there. I'd also suggest that, again, with some of the matters that I mentioned earlier about support of women and families, there's broad support for expanded options for leave for women who get pregnant, guaranteed paid leave for women who get pregnant. There's this interesting proposal that's gained some traction in pro-life circles called Make Birth Free, which I think is very interesting as well. And so the general and the focus on the expanded child tax credits also has very significant support. Now, it's not universal support, of course, but one of the things I think that's most interesting about this at our current moment, anyway, is I think maybe the three of us are maybe used to a Republican Party that was more skeptical of those things. Small government, these sort of things empower poor people to have babies. We don't want that. But it seems to me anyway, and I'd be curious the views that both of you have on this, it seems to me we have a different Republican Party in the post-Trump era that is more friendly to these kinds of programs. It doesn't have a kind of libertarian kind of small government reaction, but instead as a more populist reaction. Like, how does this work for the vast majority of people? And the vast majority of people, we all know, struggle to have the resources for many things, especially in the era that we're in of how expensive things are, housing and food and transportation, other things. So to make things easier for people to have babies, it seems to be common ground as well.
I'm glad you said that. Talking about how maybe the Republican and conservatives in general maybe have shifted. I was thinking that about myself in preparation for this conversation. I was doing some research on the Make Birth Free such movement, or what you suggested, and I want to dig into that a little bit. And I was reading through that, and on the one hand, I was thinking, okay, I read one report that would be roughly 60 billion, give or take, and I started thinking, well, that's not so bad, compared to other things we spend money on. Well, that's not a conservative viewpoint from 10, 15 years ago, that's for sure. Any extra money is a no. But even I was like, well, I don't know if this is worthy of an investment or not, but when you compare the other things we invest our money in, oh yeah, it's not so bad. I don't know, Marcy, what do you think about all that?
Well, I was just gonna say, you, Charlie, are one of the ones that got me to think about this more, because I read your book Beyond the Abortion Wars several years ago, and I was coming from a staunch conservative, no money on anything perspective, and it just raised the question in my mind. And I'm kind of with you, Scott. I look at all the other things we've been willing to spend, our politicians have been willing to spend money on over the years, and it's like, gosh, like we could still make birth free and pay for maternity leave and majorly slash the budget and come out ahead financially, probably, just looking at all the waste that there is in political spending. So yeah, that's been kind of an evolution in my views over the years too. Like, any angle we can kind of attack this issue from, I think, is worth exploring. And if part of the issue, and we know one of the main reasons women give for having abortions is economic, financial strain and pressure. So if we can alleviate that, let's explore it. Let's figure out how to make that happen. I'm curious, because at the time that this episode will be released, we'll be a few days into the new presidential administration. And I was just thinking, like, the GOP just changed their platform in discouraging ways when it comes to abortion. But I wonder if on the other side, because of these other changes in the GOP thinking about spending and other things, I wonder if there are other initiatives or policies that we might look to, that this administration might introduce, that say, okay, we hate how you've made the platform changes on the specific issue of abortion, but I wonder if there are other policies that would be helpful for women. I don't know. I'm curious y'all's thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be naive about the political roadblocks here. When you got an administration coming in that is more populist and friendly to this, you also have one. You also have folks in the coalition who are doing Doge, or it should be Dodge, but we're calling it Doge for some reason. I'm not sure why, but which wants to cut so much of federal spending. Yeah. So one thing we can do is maybe empower other groups to do this if that can't get done at a federal level. The George W. Bush administration, I'm old enough to remember, really focused on empowering religious and other organizations to try to help in these areas. So that's a no-brainer. But I do think we ought to focus on, as you mentioned, using the money we do spend in ways that are life-affirming, but also, let's just face it, help people have children. I mean, we have radically lower rates of fertility in the West than in the United States. This is going to be a huge problem for us financially down the road as we have generations retiring and not enough people working and paying taxes, right, to help support them. And so the more, just from a financial point of view, if that's what we're talking about, it shouldn't be just about that. But if we are talking about finances, that's going to be an actual consideration as well. And beyond finances, how about focusing? I just love this idea of focusing on the structures and systems and about how they're coercive. Mm-hmm. One of the things that a few of us have been kicking around is possible dueling ballot proposals for all these states that are trying to use ballot measures to pass the violence of abortion in their states constitutionally. What about dueling ballot proposals that would highlight this? And you two might have better opinions about how that would work than I would. But one of the things that I and a few others were kicking around, what about having laws on that we'd subject to a ballot measure that would force abortion providers to get informed consent from every single person, and if not, be able to be sued into oblivion if they don't, right? And that would be, anecdotally I've heard that if something like that passed, the abortion industry would have to like vacate that state because so much of the abortion they procure has zero attempt to get informed consent and often involves explicit sexual violence or pimps sort of bringing their underage prostitutes or sex trafficking horribleness associated with it. So I at least think those are directions that we could go to go in the direction of as well.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, and and we've had the opportunity to dig into this a little bit, and just when you think about public opinion on all of this, and traditionally we think of pro-life, pro-choice, and then the middle, and I think it's inaccurate to call the middle undecided. They think they're decided on this issue. Probably a better word would be unaware, and they're unaware of the things that you just talked about. They're unaware of, for example, how abortion is a boon to sex trafficking. I think if we can shine the spotlight on that, the challenge is the how, because I'm thinking of your idea, okay, dueling ballot amendments, and if we propose something like what you just suggested, holding them liable. I can just hear the ads now from the other side, right? It's like, oh, they're gonna make abortion impossible and all. We see this. We see it in Florida. You try to keep some safety restrictions in place, and suddenly you're being restrictive, and the world's coming to an end according to them. It just gets back to just trying to get that truth out and helping people, the unaware, understand the ramifications of not just the abortion itself, but all the surrounding issues that associate with it.
Yeah, I hope this isn't me wish casting, or I guess more and more young people, which I am not anymore, obviously, but talking about manifesting things into existence. I hope that's not what this is. But it seems like we're in an era of truth telling, right? We're able to say things that are true that just 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we were not able to talk about. Abortion does, for reasons we've already sort of mentioned, I think, seem to be the broadly speaking, the issue of abortion in the broad sense seems to be one of the issues that has not fallen into that category of an issue that we can now tell the truth about. But my gosh, if it ever does, if these dominoes continue to fall and abortion maybe remains the last one where we could finally say what's true and have it be taken seriously in the public discourse, it would be a total, I don't need to tell you, it would be a total game changer for the reasons you just mentioned.
Well, and I think, again, talking about some of those peripheral issues or poking at people's perception of abortion by highlighting industry or highlighting the connection to other social evils that we all agree are evil, like sex trafficking. I wonder sometimes if, as a movement, we've tried to do that, but by highlighting the most extreme things that just are too hard for people to believe. Like I'm thinking about the David Daleiden videos that came out several years ago, and people it was like too horrible to believe that it was true, and so I think people didn't believe it. Or the idea of partial birth abortions is like too horrible, and so it sounds like something you would make up if you're against abortion. So maybe coming in, I don't know, I keep going back to coming in at these different angles would begin to peel back the layers in ways that we haven't been able to yet as a movement, because we already know how horrible abortion is, and we already know the truth about it. So we jump to the most extreme, thinking now we've won the argument or we've won public perception, but we haven't guided them along to reveal the whole underbelly of the beast, maybe.
Yeah, and I'll just add a yes and to this. I think one of the essential tools that maybe I haven't discussed yet, but I really ought to, is the tool of storytelling and having people tell their stories. This is we've seeded that ground in many ways, but part of the problem is we have a public discourse that is stacked against us. We have media stacked against us, but my gosh, there are so many stories to tell that are just on the verge again of this moment of actually getting to truth tell about this issue. And if we could have, for instance, Britney Spears tell her story about, I think it was Justin Timberlake, was it? She tells a story in her recent book about how she wanted the baby and Justin didn't want it, and then she had the abortion essentially. I think I have that right.
Yeah.
That story is the story of so many women, especially in those privileged contexts, right, where they're expected to, sort of get in line when it comes to this. And if we can find people who are willing to tell their stories, like someone like Britney Spears or someone like somebody with that kind of public standing, with that public image, to kind of take the cover off of this and reveal, like you said, the dark underbelly of all of this. We need those storytellers. We need to encourage those storytellers because, again, I hate to denigrate my own field, but those stories are worth a million arguments, right? They're just so much more powerful than the actual arguments.
Amen. That you hit the nail on the head when people ask, what can we be doing, especially if, when we think about these state ballot amendments and all the other things. If you're not near an election, like right now, we just came off one. Well, what can I be doing now? Gathering those stories, collecting those stories. When we have a chance to talk to pregnancy help centers, they have access to some of the very best stories. And that kind of, those stories are going to move. Those are powerful. I mean, you and I, nerds like you and I, we can spout data all the time, right? But if you hear a woman who has gone through that, or even a post-abortive woman, and hear from how she is recovering in her pain, that sticks with you. And I just don't even know. So I'm glad you said that you hit the nail on the head. I want to circle back around a little bit because I'm a little slow on the uptake. So I'm thinking about, I want to go back to make birth free.
Okay.
And so the thinking is if we eliminate the financial burden, they're more likely to keep the baby. So far, so good. I mean, that's what we're trying to argue, right?
I mean, I guess to that I would just say it's also, I mean, that is the main thing, right? But you can have multiple reasons to do something. I think a related reason to do it would be to signal to media, to signal to our public discourse that we're not just interested in making abortion illegal, that we have these similar related attempts to speak and to work and to lobby and to effort into this space as well. And so I think I want to emphasize that it is about helping women and families first, but I think it's also about sending a signal in the public discourse about who we are and what we value.
That makes sense. That does make sense to me. And what I can wrap my head around are the things that we're talking about that help the woman leading up to the birth, like the paid leave and things like that. I mean, that because she's, again, as I understand it, she's making that decision in the moment with, looking at her immediate future, especially financially, these next 9 months. And again, we're generalizing. I understand that.
Yeah.
And so I can wrap my head around, paid leave and things like that. Actually, I mean, all of these Marcy, I'm turning into a progressive.
Well, I was just thinking, like, I see this as a great opportunity for various factions maybe to be able to come together. So I'm thinking most people here, pro-life conservatives, social justice liberals, and think there's no common ground. And I think something like this does present common ground. So in addition to signaling our support of women and mothers as a movement, it also signals to other people kind of on the periphery, no, we've got like a broader view of this than just ending abortion. Not that that wouldn't be noble and big enough on its own, but there are other ways for people who maybe never would have thought that they could work together to come together to move this forward.
And I think it helps with our movement breaking through its current struggles. So again, a yes and here. My sense is that part of the work we need to do is getting people to a place where they hear the words pro-life movement and don't sort of cringe or put us into a box or say, well, whatever they are, I know I'm not like them. And that's another related reason, right, to speak into these kinds of contexts, to say, well, to these people, well, you thought we were just about like trying to punish women for having sex or something, but turns out not, right? And maybe that could be an entree into a whole different set of conversations we could have and say, you know what, this whole narrative that you've been fed by a compliant media, which is lying about us for generations now, it's not true. And they've been lying about so many other things that you've understood them to lie about. They've been lying about us too. And let me help you understand what it is we truly stand for and who we are and what we value, and to help you unlearn, as the great Yoda said, what you have learned.
Yeah, I think we can end the discussion on that profound quote.
You're too young to know who Yoda is, aren't you, Marcy?
Oh, are you kidding?
Okay.
I had to get my Star Wars geekdom into this. So.
That's good. That it was well placed. I appreciate that. I could continue this conversation all day because I like to get in the heady academic space as well. But hopefully we've given people a lot to think about. I do want to plug your book because it was transformational for me, or formational maybe, as I was getting into the pro-life space. So highly recommend Beyond the Abortion Wars if people have not read that yet, to check that out. I found it very just informative, very again, a lot of the just data and information, but also well thought out arguments and questions about things that we can be thinking about as a movement to go broader than the current factions maybe that we have, and even some interesting policy ideas that those of us on maybe the fiscal conservative side should give some thought to. So I think that's great. Charlie, where can people find you if they want to find out more about other things that you write, things that you're doing?
Well, now I'm a little hesitant to give out my website because it has quotes on there I don't agree with. But
Charlie's going to go clean that
I'm
up.
gonna go clean
Give
that
him
up.
a few days and then you can go check it out.
As long as you ignore the quote, you can go to charlescamosy.com. And I'm also on Twitter X at ccamosy, CCAMOSY.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, and look forward to going into a new administration, a new era, hopefully for the pro-life movement. And we'll hopefully
Pro-life
see some
3.0. Here we go.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks again for listening to Dear Jane.
You can follow along every day on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And make sure you also are subscribed so you never miss an episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube. Ring that bell so you're notified and you never miss an episode.